Our next session is Securing the Future, Cloud and Technological Security, and it focuses on one of the most important issues facing both India and the US today, how to secure our digital economies. As the backbone of industries and governments, cloud security is critical for national security and economic stability, especially as cyber threats evolve. I'm delighted to introduce our distinguished panelists, and I request you to come up on stage as I announce your names. Mr. Abhishek Singh, Additional Secretary at the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, who has played a pivotal role in shaping India's digital policies and cybersecurity frameworks. Mr. Anant Nag, Area Vice President, India, ASEAN and GCR, Zscaler. Parminder Kakria, Vice President in Government Affairs and Policy at Kyndryl. And Ranganath Sudarshan, Partner at Covington and Burling. This session will be moderated by Brad Staples, CEO of APCO. Can I have a round of applause for the panelists? This session will be moderated by Brad Staples, CEO of APCO. I hand over the session to you, sir. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be with you. I'm very conscious that we just came from a panel before with a very different topic, and what I can assure you is where we lack in gender diversity, the diversity of insights on this panel is going to be rich, and this will be an intriguing conversation. Let's dive straight into the discussion because we came from a session upstairs with some great insights. Mr. Singh, let me turn to you if I may. Can you just summarize some of what we heard upstairs in our session? The AI task force meeting just upstairs was extremely rich, and there were a broad section of representatives from the investment funding world, but also from the technology sector overall. Maybe you could just share some insights and some learnings that we can all take from that session.
See, the biggest insight that I took for myself was that, which was shared by many of the speakers in that session, is the challenges that we are facing with regard to adoption of AI, with regard to innovation, with regard to regulations, are not very different, whether it's India or whether it's the US or anywhere else. So we are facing common challenges across. So whether it's like provision of compute to those who need it, to researchers or to academicians or startups and new companies, smaller enterprises, or whether it's the issue of skilling, or whether it's the issue of providing data sets for developing AI-based solutions, or the whole issue of regulating, what to regulate the technology or to regulate the application, how do you distinguish between those who are developing the foundational models and those who are doing the use cases. So the challenges that we are facing, especially with regard to AI regulation, are global in nature, because very often we find the foundational models being developed in one geography, the use cases by somebody else living in some other geography, and the end users somewhere else. So we do need to have discussions at a global level with regard to having a common minimum benchmark for having a global governance framework for AI. So very interesting that the key takeaway is that we need to, and governments cannot do it together. Governments have to do it with the private sector, governments have to do it with the industry, governments have to do it with the ones who are developing the technology. So how do you kind of create this ecosystem of sharing information, trying use cases, learning from each other, what has worked, what has not worked. If the UK AI Safety Institute has come out with some frameworks, does it apply to other countries? What are the pros and cons of the EU AI Act, whether it applies to other geographies or not? So sharing of information, sharing of expertise, sharing of best practices. There was an example shared about how Singapore and US have worked on a model. So how can we learn from each other? How can we get the lessons which has already been kind of seen in any other geography applied to another country, and how do we develop a framework so that it provides an equal space, it provides an equal opportunity for those who are building new applications to be able to compete with the big tech companies who have already been there, done that. So that's the kind of discussion that we had in that forum.
I just want to pause before we have the rest of the conversation. Having listened to regulators and policymakers in the United States and in Europe a lot over recent months talk about creating the right regulatory environment for innovation, talking about a common minimum level of regulation and regulating on the basis of use cases is not what I hear in Europe and the United States as much as one would hope. This gives, I think, many in this room a sense of real optimism and excitement about what might be possible in terms of this partnership between the US and India. What's the philosophy and mindset behind what you just said? Why is this government taking that approach when we see an ex-ante, more prospective regulatory approach in other markets?
See, like our approach has always been pro-innovation. The strength of India is in its AI workforce, it is our strength of our startup companies and all to create AI solutions that can solve several problems at population scale. So for example, if we have to use AI to make healthcare accessible or education accessible, we are going to leverage that. We are trying to take the advantages, the positives of the technology, and then also be aware of the risks that are there, have guardrails to prevent misuse or abuse of the technology. So that's how we are approaching. We are not going whole hog into regulating first and then allowing innovation, because if we do that, we will be killing the spirit of Indian enterprises, Indian businesses, and they will never be able to catch up with the companies in China or the United States who say, and they will always be one step behind. So our approach is more of pro-innovation, while being aware of the risks which are there and looking at risks from the point of view of user harm, from the point of view of preventing, say, issues like deep fakes or misinformation, and then allowing the technology ecosystem to grow.
Thank you, sir. Anath, let me turn to you. At Zscaler, trust is at the heart of the technology you've developed and the enterprise you're building. And for users in a digitizing India, this is central to the future. Can you talk a little bit about that zero trust concept at Zscaler and what trust means in an Indian context which may be different from a US context?
That's a very pertinent question. Actually, I'll take a cue from what Mr. Singh just shared. The innovation in the last 10, 15 years on the digital side from an India context has become so big that India is scaling its economy, and the next phase of growth over the next 20 years is going to be dependent on the digital public infrastructure that's being built by the government. Now, when you digitize and provide citizen-centric services using this digital infrastructure, it becomes pertinent to secure that infrastructure for making the economy sustainable. And that's where Zscaler or organizations like Zscaler will come into the picture. Our objective is to secure every user who's accessing a service, be it a citizen or be it an employee working for a digital economy. So if India has to scale from a 3.5 trillion or 4 trillion to a 15 trillion economy over the next 20 years, the growth is going to come from the organizations in the digital space. And it's our objective to work with Indian entities, with Indian government organizations to make citizen-centric services sustainable as well as secure. And we're working very, very closely with Government of India to make sure that the infrastructure that's built, the services that are built are secure. And it's not a copy-paste model. It depends, it's very, very nuanced because each state has its own set of challenges and the federal has its own set of challenges. Now, where the moolah is or where the money is where the attackers are going to come. And also, if you look at the geopolitical scenario that we're seeing, and that's going to evolve over the next 20 years, I think we've got a common objective to achieve and make India more sustainable.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just take a slightly different approach and maybe ask a question both to Parminder and to Ranga at the same time. Can we talk a little bit about how perceptions of India as a global innovator have changed? The story, maybe Parminder to you first. I mean, the Kyndryl story is extraordinary. And I have to say, many people may not be as familiar as they should be with the organization. Perhaps as you answered that question, you share a few insights into the scale and the presence of the business, because it's quite an exceptional story.
Sure, thank you. I think as we look towards India at 47, and the government of India, they've given an aspiration for India to be a Viksit Bharat by 2047. What I think all stakeholders look forward to see the country, our country, as a powerhouse in the world when it comes to technology, when it comes to innovation, when it comes to economic growth. And you mentioned about Kyndryl. For those of who don't know about Kyndryl, we are a $16 billion company, spun off from IBM 2.5 years back. Globally employ 80,000 people, India about 27,000 people. But what we do at the heart of what we do is run mission critical systems, which include airports, banking infrastructure, manufacturing systems, and we run and we modernize those infrastructure. So I think that at the heart of what's happening in India, and this is something that has altered, is I think India is a unique case where government has invested in creating a public infrastructure in a way which enables a private infrastructure to come and innovate. Now, what's happening in some of the use cases that we have seen? We are right now, let's say, working with banks, and the banks are using this public infrastructure to leverage their core banking. So you're working with Canara Bank and others as to how core banking can now be leveraged using digital public infrastructure. We're working with for instance, how GST network can now use or some of this network to leverage and deliver GST services to the users of GST network. So I think what's happening is this digital infrastructure is scaling up and it's enabling delivery of public services at a scale that we've never seen before. But I think what's also enabled us to do is it's enabled us to innovate. One of the things that I think artificial intelligence now brings to the core is as this infrastructure is evolving, how does this become resilient? So if there are, let's say, SSL layers which are getting broken and the infrastructure sees those layers, or let's say a CPU is being overloaded, or let's say a server is becoming end of life, rather than waiting for the break to happen and then fix it, how can we really use artificial intelligence so that the system can use this intelligence and the architecture can evolve itself? I think that's something which becomes critical for us as we move forward. But I think what has happened in India, in the country, in case of digital innovation, is that we were a big consumer of technology. I think what has happened in the last couple of years is now we're using technology to transform our digital, our core infrastructure, and that's something which the world is seeing, and they're seeing that, look, how health is evolving, how financial infrastructure is evolving, and that's something as a case study for the world. So, thank you.
Thank you, Perminder. Ranga, maybe we've just heard how the digital infrastructure, the whole Aadhaar network and what's been built with that innovation is central to accelerating a safe, secure, fast-paced Gen AI technology sort of backbone in India. Where, from a legal perspective, does intellectual property sit in that context and informed, insightful regulation?
Sure, Brad. So as an attorney who practices in Washington, I've been watching the Indian legal landscape in IP for many, many years. And in short, I'm seeing, and I think many would agree, that India is moving very, very rapidly ahead in terms of IP protection. To put it bluntly, the perception of India outside of India for a long time has been that India is a country that regards the global IP system as not necessarily something that helps India. India has had a reputation of being somewhat anti-patent, and that goes back to the historical pharmaceutical industry and the need for affordable medicines in India. But as India is moving up the value supply chain and becoming more of a technology innovator, what we're seeing is that the Indian legal system and the patent system is adapting and encouraging innovation very much in line with what we see around the world. So just a few data points on that. Take the Indian Patent Office, take the Indian courts, and take what we're looking at, what we see in the corporate space. The Indian Patent Office recently released statistics that they issued over 100,000 patents in the year 2023. And that's up from less than 10,000 in 2016. So now the Indian Patent Office stands as the sixth busiest patent office in the world. And they've implemented many, many reforms to improve the speed of applications and other mechanisms to bring the Indian Patent Office up to world standards. What I notice significant is of those over 100,000 granted patents, it's very well balanced. Half of those are Indian applicants and the other half are foreign applicants who are investing in the IP system. So that's very encouraging. In terms of the courts, obviously rule of law and the ability to enforce IP rights is critical when you talk about companies investing in India and building high-tech industry. Recently, the Delhi High Court opened a specialized IP bench that is specific to ruling on IP issues, including patent, trademark, and copyright. And the Delhi High Court has recently issued judgment in favor of foreign IP holders and against Indian IP holders, including in some cases involving Ericsson, Novartis, including cases in the cellular space and pharma space. So the message that I'm seeing is that in terms of the administrative state with the Patent Office and the Indian court system, India is telling the world we're open for business and we are investing in the IP system. Last, in terms of what I see in the corporate landscape, again, there's been a lot of change in the last 10 years. The Indian corporates we work with are appointing in-house IP counsel, investing in filing and receiving patents, and getting much more sophisticated in terms of the IP ecosystem. So all very positive trends, obviously a long way to go, but it's very, very inspiring.
Thank you. Before I come back to you, Additional Secretary, can I just ask both of you, as innovators, just to comment on what Ranga just spoke about. How important is this clear, certain rule of law and an effective patent environment and just the application of IP rules in India? How central is that to your success here?
So if you look at the evolution, I just want to go back in history as a context. Most of the US organizations or international organizations that came to Asia Pacific went to Singapore for one reason, because the rules, the laws, everything looked similar, even though the market was very small. Fast forward 30 years from now, if you look at it, if you look at APJ or Asia Pacific region, India, Japan, and China are the largest markets. So it's super critical for us to set up the right intent, laws, and encourage organizations to deliver and develop patents here in India. And as innovators, it's very, very important. And like Sundar mentioned, it's evolving over the next 20 years. I think it will evolve and become very similar to how it's applicable in the US or international markets. I'm very, very optimistic of that happening in India.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think very pertinent question. And there is a reason why all of this innovation is happening as to how private sector can use the public infrastructure and innovate. I'll take an example. For somebody to get a diagnostic test in any part of the world is a complex process. Now, in India, because the public infrastructure is in place, one can give the sample in the morning, and in a couple of hours, the system works on this digital highway, the payments happen, the necessary data flows, and in a couple of hours, the diagnostic tests are generated, and whoever is the recipient can get that. Now, in order to do that, there's certain IP that's involved. And what's happening, I think, what's fueling this innovation is there's a greater recognition of IP, there's a greater recognition of people working together. I'll take another example. RBI recently launched a unified lending interface. We had the UPI, now we have the unified lending interface. Now, there are different, for a bank to say a yes or a no to a farmer loan, it used to take about 11 to 12 weeks because there are different data sources and there are different IPs and they're built on different IPs. Now, what has happened now as a result of that innovation is what used to take 11 to 12 weeks, now the systems are able to talk to each other, just like in case of UPI, and the bank can now arrive at a decision in 11 minutes. I think that's transformational. So when I think IP is enabling that, there's a bigger awareness of people to work together, and that's transformation.
Additional Secretary, Ananth just mentioned Singapore. Upstairs in the task force, and I wasn't there for the whole session. I heard Singapore mentioned maybe 8 times. The Honourable Prime Minister has just come from a visit in Singapore to see his counterpart, Lawrence Wong, and is heading to the US very soon. What does India take from the example of Singapore, which I find cited everywhere around the world, and find it extraordinary because this country is at a different scale in terms of population size and its economy, etc. What does India take from Singapore but will do differently in the future?
See, like, even though Singapore may appear to be much smaller in scale compared to India, but the way the GovTech, earlier the GovTech, now the Department, the Ministry of Digital Initiatives, the way it's been architected is to bring together all facets of government on a common platform through interoperable open standards, so that data from one sector is easily shared with other, and then the citizens to whom the government seeks to serve with the digital transformation projects see the government as one common whole. So there are a lot of learnings with the whole Singapore model of digital transformation, and those are the ones that we share with them, what we have done, and learn from them. And as for the model that we have adopted, in fact, when we built our digital transformation projects, we kind of course, built it from the point of view of India's specific requirements, given our size, complexity, and all, and that's how the identity project, or the payments project, or the document exchange, the DigiLocker project were conceptualized. But at the same time, we tried to learn from even initiatives, say in Estonia, the X-Roads project, how that allows a seamless exchange of information and data across sectors and ensures that citizens get a better experience. Paraminder spoke about the ULI, but the account aggregator framework does the same. Okay, like, how does the various financial information that is required for making a decision for lending or giving credit depends on whether the person has cash flow, whether the person has filing taxes, or whether the person has been prompt in paying his loans earlier, and based on that somebody can take a call there. Similarly, the various sources of income that somebody has, and all these data sources might be in disparate databases, disparate departments, but bringing it together on one platform, using it for taking a decision, using it for a microfinance call, which can further add to the economic value that the person is creating. So that's the whole way in which it has been architected. We have been like following the global models which are there, plus sharing what we have been able to do within India, and learn and share with that. So Singapore comes very useful when it comes to the entire, the way the architecting of the digital government has been done.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to ask you all in one quick phrase, as we come towards a close, what can India learn from the US experience as driving innovation and creating, exponential growth in technology? And just one notion from each of you before we wrap up. Ranga, can I start with you?
Sure. And as an American, I'll answer it in the other direction. What can the U.S. learn from India? I think the excitement for technology education, and particularly what I see here in terms of women in STEM, there's a lot of excitement, and I think the West has some more excitement and some more growth to go there, particularly in terms of representation of women in STEM. I think India is doing a lot of great things that the West can be inspired by.
Fantastic.
I think two things. One is, if you have to continue to leap forward, we got to have future forward education. We got to have the talent available who's going to enable this innovation. So you got to invest in skilling, invest. I think that's first. Second, now the transformation is reaching to the masses. The money is reaching, the funds, the opportunity is reaching. There is digital vulnerability. So you've got to invest in, we had this opportunity to work with women, and they're saying that, look, we're getting the funds, but can you just let us know so that we're not susceptible to a cyber fraud? And we ran that program, and then they came back, look, we're good now with that, but can you please teach my elder one as well? So I think there's this huge opportunity to invest in cybersecurity, in investing in educating people about cyber risks and cyber frauds. Thank you.
Since you're asking for one, the colonial hangover we're getting over the colonial hangover, which means that the one thing that we can learn from the US is, can we become a risk-taking economy? And I think I was just speaking to a friend of mine, we work with a lot of banks. He was saying last quarter, India's investment in the market has overtaken the investment in savings. So we're moving from a savings economy into a slightly risk-taking economy, and as we scale over the next 5, 10 years, I'm 100% sure that we will copy the risk. Once we get into the risk framework mindset, I think innovation will just accelerate even more further.
If I have to say what can learn from the US, number one will be like the public investment in R&D that the US does, like especially initiatives like DARPA and all. So we need to do a much more investment from the public, from the government side in research and development. And the second thing that I would like to mention is that the ecosystem that exists in the US with regard to the partnerships within academia and industry. Somehow we have not been able to build such innovation centers. Some of the IITs are starting to do that, but we need a much stronger ecosystem partnership between the academia, the research which is happening, and the industry which is trying to ensure that whatever patents are developed or whatever solutions are made are actually taken into the product stage and kind of made it available to the people. So that's the two things that I would like to kind of have more in India, what the US has been doing.
Thank you all. That was fabulous and fast-paced. I'm just going to wrap up with a few comments because I think this panel illustrates an exciting future ahead in terms of the US-India partnership in the tech space. We know that India is becoming a powerhouse of innovation, very different to historic perceptions of technology in this country. It is driving and shaping the global technology platforms for the future. It's based on a progressive regulatory model or a government willing to listen. And that is extraordinarily empowering and exciting to hear. The digital infrastructure created here, it creates an enabling environment unlike anything else. We heard that. And the tenfold increase in patent applications illustrates just what's happening on the ground. And it's clear India's listening. It's listening to Estonia, it's listening to Singapore, it's taking lessons from elsewhere to create the right environment for this country for the future. And going back to what Ranga said earlier, women are going to benefit very significantly in this. And it's extremely exciting to see women in STEM, but also benefiting in the technology space. And maybe that can be a lesson for the US too, where women haven't been as present in the tech sector as much as one would hope. Maybe India can steer a new path there. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you. And before we all go, gentlemen, these guys were great. Can I have another round of applause? They were great, right? And Brad, I am so happy you ended your remarks on women in STEM because these guys were great, but the one thing that was missing was a phenomenal woman. And Kavita was supposed to join us, in fact. So we had Parminder graciously step in on her behalf, but we were supposed to have a phenomenal woman up here. But I am so proud to say that at USIBC, half of our staff is female. The minister came in and gave great remarks on the empowerment of female. We're talking about females in the workforce, and at USIBC, we have an incredible board of female directors. So notwithstanding the fact that we didn't have a female on this panel due to Kavita's emergency, we are very mindful of it. It's always at the forefront of our work on panels and discussions. And so as a senior advisor at USIBC, and I lead the AI task force, I came up here to say that we haven't forgotten about the women. We're still very much a part of the conversation and panel. And I want to thank these great gentlemen as well for coming in today. So thank you, gentlemen, so much.
Thank you so much. I request all of you to please huddle for a group photograph. And I would like to thank our panelists for shedding light on the future of cloud security and its importance in the US-India relationship. Thank you very much. That's all right. Not a huge calamity. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Amy and gentlemen.